Hello, so today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about points, lines, and planes as we start to explore some geometry. So what we want to be able to do is identify and model these points, lines, planes, collinear and coplanar points, and intersecting lines and planes all in space, right? So we're talking about space. It's just kind of saying like on a piece of paper we're imagining all these different geometric things interacting with one another. So first things first, we got to get through some definitions. Right. So first off is just what the heck is a point, right? So, you might be thinking about a point on a graph, right? That is a point, right? But in geometry, we can kind of think about it as a little bit more abstract than that, which is sometimes a little bit more difficult, right? But all a point really is it's just a location. Right? So if you have just some location in space, right, that's a point. If you think about where the school is on a map, that's a point. If I think about where my nearest Dunkin' Donuts is, that is a point. It's a location. Right? After that, we've got a line. And a line is really just a set of points. Right? When you plug into the GPS, like, hey, bring me to Aroma Joe's, right? It's going to give you basically a line on a map to follow. Well, each and every point, every time you take one step or get a little bit closer to where you're going, you're at a different location. So it's a bunch of points that are all really, really close together, and you're traveling through all those different locations. That's what makes up a line, right? One of the first new words that we're probably running into here is collinear, right? So collinear is when you have three or more points that all are on the same line, right? So co kind of means together, right? And then linear is talking about lines, right? So collinear means together on the same line, right? Specifically, it needs to be three or more points. Right? We've also got this thing called a plane. It's not the thing that's hanging out down at the jet port, taking off every hour on the hour. It is a flat surface, kind of, if you want to think about it, made up of points. Oops, switch back to the same color there. Right, so a plane is just, imagine a piece of paper, right? You can put a whole bunch of dots on that piece of paper. You can put points at all those different locations on it. A plane is just when you've covered up every single last little bit of that paper with points, right? It's a little bit more complicated than that. Planes actually go on forever in every direction. We just usually only take a look at a little chunk of it, right? So we've also got another word that's kind of similar to collinear that we were talking about. It's coplanar, right? So again, it's going to be sort of similar. It's co, so it's talking about things being together, and then planar means talking about planes. So for coplanar specifically, it's when we have four or more points that are all on the same plane together, right? So, collinear just needs three, coplanar needs four. Let's clean that up a little bit. A little better, right? So, collinear, three or more points on the same line, coplanar, four or more on the same plane. We got this little table down here where I've already filled in a good chunk of it for you, save you a bit of writing. All right, so this is a kind of a handy little table to tell, how do we name these things? What are their properties, right? So let's start with point, right? We'll go one column at a time. So do point, then line, then plane. When I'm drawing a point, right, if you just think about what it is, there we go. That is a point. We're going to add a little bit more to it, right? We're going to say that this is point P, so I'm going to put a little letter on it there, right? When we're thinking about how we actually draw that point, we just draw it as a dot. That's it. Just put a dot somewhere. That's a point. You've specified a location with that dot. We name it with a capital letter, right? So I didn't have to name it P. I could name it capital A or capital Q, right? So we would say point P. Right. As far as the special facts go, this is kind of neat. A point has no shape and no size. You might be thinking oh, well, if it's a dot, then it's like a circle, right? No, right? What's really going on is we're just saying a location right there. If you take your finger and just kind of point it in the air, where your fingertip is pointing to is a point, right? You are pointing at something. You have just specified a location, but there's nothing actually there. You're just saying right here, right over there. Right? As far as words and symbols go, right, if I was trying to write out what we would call that point, we would just say point P right? We name it by that capital letter. All right, as far as a line goes, right, we all know how to draw a line. Whoa, look at that. We're going to add a little bit more than that to it, though. Right, when we're drawing a line, lines go on forever in each direction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put little arrows on the ends, right? And then we're going to add a couple other things to it. I'm going to add 2 dots. I'm going to give those dots, which are points, letters. I'm going to say A and B. I'm also going to add one other thing to this, right? I'm going to add a letter on like the end, like over by the dot, or over by the arrow, sorry. So I just put a little cursive lowercase n. If you wanted to put just like a lowercase n like that, that's also fine. All right, and then let's talk about, what we just did there. The way that we drew that line is we drew, a line, but specifically it has to have arrows on the ends, right? A line goes on forever. We're going to get to talking about line segments, which do stop. We're going to talk about rays, which only go forever in one direction, right? But for now, a line just goes on forever in each direction. We name it by the letters of 2 points on the line, like that A and B we'd put on there, or we can use a lowercase letter like the N at the end of that. As far as line, like special facts go, there is only one line that goes through 2 specific points. Right? If you imagine, like, oh yeah, I can move a line anywhere. If you choose 2 specific points, there's only one line that travels through them, which is kind of neat. As far as words and symbols, right? One way that we could do it is with those 2 points that we have on there, A and B. So I could say AB, and then the way that we represent it as a line is we just draw a tiny little line over it like that, right? We could also switch it up, right? We could also have it go kind of in reverse like that. Doesn't hurt anything. It's just another way to write that same information, right? Another way we could do it is we could just refer to it as line N, right? Refer to it by that lowercase letter we used. Yeah. Last but not least, we got a plane, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to draw ourselves this kind of slanted rectangle, also known as a parallelogram, right? And mine's fancy. It kind of filled itself in like that, which is pretty nifty, right? And what we're going to do on there, and actually I'm going to zoom in a little bit just so it's a little bit easier to see, right, is we're going to put 3 dots on there that don't line up. All right, so I've got my 3 points, and I'm just going to give them names, right? Let's call this one X, call that one Y, and this one Z. All right. We're also going to add in something else on here, right? We're going to add in, let's say, capital cursive letter F, which I know that mine is not a proper capital cursive letter F, but as long as it kind of gets the point across that it's not, just a regular letter, right? So that is what we're going to use as our plane. All right, let me get back zoomed properly here. So the way that we drew that plane is as a shaded in, slanted, 4-sided figure. All right, so basically all we want to do is just take a parallelogram like that. If you have like a pencil or something where shading it in is feasible, then we should probably try and do that, but it's not like of utmost importance, right? Don't make it harder to see what's on the plane just to shade it in. Right? We name it with a capital cursive letter like that F there, or by 3 non-collinear points on the plane, right? So they have to be 3 points that don't line up. We can name it by either way of those. As far as the facts, it's kind of similar to a line. There is only one plane that can go through 3 specific non-collinear points, which is kind of neat, right? You can only get one out of an infinity of possibilities, right? Only one will actually work. As far as words and symbols to describe this, right, we could call it plane F, or we could call it plane XYZ, right? You could also like switch up the letters XYZ. You could call it plane YZX or something like that, right? It doesn't really matter as long as you're saying 3 non-collinear points together, all right? So let's actually get into looking at some problems, right? Make sure you pause here and copy this down if you still need anything up here, but we're going to move along. So one of the things that we're going to be practicing with is we're going to try and name things based on a given diagram. All right, so we've got this plane that's in blue over here. We kind of move that other one off the screen a bit. And we want to name a point on the plane. So if you're looking at it, I've got plenty of possibilities that I could choose, right? Anything that is a point, I could say is a point on the plane, right? I could use point A, B, C, D, or E, right? Any of those would be a point on this plane. If we're thinking about a line containing point A, right, we could say, oh yeah, that's line cursive L there, right? We could say that it's line BC with the little arrows above it like that. We could even say that it's line DA, line DA with the little things over it, right? There's more that we could do. We could say CD, DC, BC, CB, right? There's a lot of different ways we could combine those letters. But as long as we're naming that line, that's all we're looking for, right? Something I will mention is as I'm writing down all these different possibilities, if I'm ever asking you to do a problem like these, all you need to do is write down one, right? I just need a point on the plane. You don't need to write down every possibility. You'd be sitting there for a while for some of them. As far as a plane containing point C, right, we could call it plane fancy N, like that one that's kind of in the bottom right corner of it, right? We could name it plane AED for automatic external defibrillator, right? Or, those are just three non-collinear points that are on that plane. We could not say that this is plane ABC because they're on the same line together, right? That one wouldn't work. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is try and pause here, see if you can answer the same questions for example 2, right? You don't need to write out all the different possibilities for points and lines and planes, right? Just give one example and then unpause when you think you got it. So if you gave that a shot, to name a point on the plane, let's just, you could say any of these. We could say J, K, L, or M, right? All those would be points on the plane. If we're naming a line containing point K, I could say that it's line, that was a very weird A, line A. We could say JK. We could say LJ, right? And so on. Right? We could get more examples for that, but as long as you're naming it by, 2 points on that line or by line A, you're fine. As far as how we name the plane, right, we could do fancy B, right? We could call it plane fancy B. We could call it plane JKM, right? Just some combination of three of those points, as long as it involves M, right? You can't choose JKL because they're all collinear, right? So something else we can do is we can take a look at real-world examples of points, lines, and planes, right? Now, they're not going to be absolutely perfect, right? Because, in the real world, like planes don't go on forever, right? We can't, have the surface of a desk go on forever in every direction. That would be kind of ridiculous. But in terms of, just kind of looking at this diagram and figuring out what things match with which, if I was thinking about an example of a point, I could say like the tip of the pencil is a point in this diagram. We could say one of the hole punch holes, right? That one's a little looser because it's not really like it is a circle, right? But you could say like the location where that is kind of like a point. As far as a line goes, you could say something like one of the blue lines that's on the paper. You could say the edge of the page. You could say that the length of the pencil itself, right? Any of those, or like the margin line, any of those would be examples of lines on here. So when we're thinking about the plane, there's really kind of only one right answer on this one for this diagram. The plane is the sheet of paper, right? Because that's the only thing that's made up of points that kind of works in multiple dimensions, right? So, we'll take a look at a couple more of these. We'll talk about some when I see you guys in class, right? So if it seems a little wonky and it's like, oh man, I don't know about that, we'll talk a little bit more about it together. We've also got these things called undefined terms, right? So this is something that, I'm not going to be quizzing you on or anything like that, but it's important to mention. Undefined terms are words that we purposefully leave without a concrete definition so that we can use them as a reference between different diagrams, right? So point, line, and plane are all undefined terms. So for example, in this diagram with the piece of paper, our points are A, B, C, and D, and they're very specific locations, right? So we defined them as locations on this diagram. If I then went back to this one a little bit further up, M, J, K, and L are all very specific points on a diagram, right? But say I wanted to add a point on this other diagram and call it A. That A that I just drew in red doesn't match with the A that I have on the sheet of paper diagram, right? So what we do is, we kind of say, oh yeah, no, that's fine. We're just talking about them between different diagrams. They don't actually need to be the exact same thing every time. So one of the other things that we're going to practice with is drawing our own diagrams based off of some information, right? And this can be a little tricky, right? So let's take it one step at a time, right? And that's what I would really suggest is, if you even want to take your hand and don't scribble it out like I'm going to do here, but if you wanted to take your hand and just cover up all that stuff real quick and just focus on one thing at a time and move it down one thing at a time, it's not a bad strat. So we're going to draw and label a plane called Fancy H with these characteristics. So first things first, I'm going to draw my plane called Fancy H. So I'm going to draw a slanted four-sided figure, and it's going to do the cool thing and shade it in for me, so that's nice. And I need to call it Fancy H. So somewhere on there, I'm going to say, all right, zoop, whoop. Cool, good enough. After that, we're going to go one step at a time. We're going to place a point A on the plane somewhere. All right, point, call it A, boom, done. Check it off, we're done with that one. We need a point B that is not on the plane. All right, so all I got to do is just draw it somewhere over to the side. Call it B, wha-bam. Step 2, done. We need to draw a line CD on the plane that contains a point E. All right, so this one, we're going to draw a line on our plane. All right, we're going to put little arrows on the ends like we're supposed to. And then the line is called CD, so we need C and D on it. And the line also needs to contain a point E. Right, so somewhere else on that line, just going to put another dot, going to call it E. All right, that's all we got to do there. Well, boom, 3 steps down. Last but not least, this one is probably the trickiest. A line called FG that goes through the plane at K. Right, so this one can be a little weird. So what I want you to imagine is, take a sheet of paper, or, you could even use your hand if you're writing something down with a pen or pencil, and just kind of imagine, what it would look like if that pen or pencil kind of went through the sheet of paper, right? What I'm doing right now, actually, right in front of my screen, is I'm taking the stylus that I'm writing this down with, and I am putting it between my middle and ring finger and just kind of holding it perpendicular to my hand. So it's kind of like oh my God, it went straight through my hand. That's what we're going to try and draw on this plane. We're going through the plane. So the tricky part about that, right? Let's draw ourselves part of a line, right? So start somewhere off the plane. Oops. And apparently go way over to the side like that did. Oops, let's fix that. There we go. All right. So start off the plane and then get to a point on the plane and kind of stop. Okay, so we're going to put an arrow at the end. We know that this is going to be our point where we kind of travel through the plane, right? We're going through the plane at the point K. So let's put a K on there. After that, we need to continue with that line, but now we can kind of imagine, all right, the part we drew is the part that's above it. Now we need to somehow show that we're below the plane, like we traveled through it. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to use a dotted line, or a dashed line, until we get off the plane, and then we can see it fully again, right? The other piece that we have to put on there is that the line is called FG. So somewhere on there, I'm going to have to put F. Somewhere else on there, I'm going to have to put G. Right? After that, that one's done. Well, boom. There we go. So, again, some of these diagram pieces can be a little tricky, right? But take it one step at a time. Make sure that you've got the right pieces before you move on to the next step, and it'll all work out just fine. Right? We will also practice with these together as well. All right, we're almost there. Right, we're going to talk about space, the final frontier. No, Space is the three-dimensional set of all points. Right? If you think about all of time and space, like the entire universe, the entire galaxy, right? It's just a bunch of locations, right? There are infinitely many locations that we could point to, right? So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about space. So we've got a diagram here. I've kind of made it a little bit bigger on my page so that you can see it a little better, especially if you're watching on a small screen. Right? We're just going to kind of work through these questions. We're going to try and answer how many planes appear in this figure. And the answer is a little tricky, right? So let's take a look at them. We've got the green one that everything's kind of resting on, right? So we've got one plane where it's called P. Then we've got this kind of pyramid-looking shape. It's kind of sticking up from there. So that pyramid has one side there that I've kind of scribbled on. It's got another side there that's kind of facing away from us too. And then for our third side of this pyramid, it's the side that is facing us, right? And I know that with the scribbles, it looks a little messy and it's a little hard to see exactly what's going on, right? But so if I kind of back up a little bit, that black part and that red part that I shaded in are facing away from us. And then we've got this last side that is facing toward us right there, okay? So that's three more planes, right? Those are surfaces. Right? If you're thinking like, oh, well, why don't we include this bottom one, right? There is an argument to be made to say like, oh yeah, that is another plane. But I'm thinking that like this is the same surface that it's resting on, right? So we're not going to include that. So altogether, we have 4 planes in this figure. Next up, we want to name 3 points that are collinear, right? And you might be thinking like, oh yeah, F, E, and A, right? But you'd be a little wrong because point A is over here, right? It's not on that same line as F and E. So the only 3 points that I see that are on the same line are D, G, and B. All right, and that's it for that one. Then we got to ask ourselves, are G, A, B, and E coplanar? All right, so G, A, B, and E. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of highlight them just to help them pop out a little bit. G, A, B, and E. All right. So what I'm seeing is that E, A, and B are all coplanar, right? They all seem to be resting on that bottom, like, green surface there. But point G is kind of hanging up in the air a little bit further up on that pyramid, right? So we're going to say no. G is floating in space. Space. Like Jodie Foster in, what was that movie, Oxygen? It was a good movie. Right, so G is floating up there. It's not on the same plane, so those 4 are not coplanar with each other. Right. Next, we're asking ourselves, at what point do EF and AB intersect? Right, so again, I'm going to break out the highlighter. EF is this line here that travels through the plane. Oops. Let's try that one more time. And then AB is this line right there. So you might be thinking like, oh yeah, if we just kind of continue from A, right, they're going to cross right there, right? But we got to remember that we're working in 3 dimensions. AB looks to kind of like be in front of that other line. So they're not actually going to cross, right? AB is going to be in front of FE, and FE is like traveling through the plane doing its own thing, right? So in this case, they do not intersect. Right, and if you're like, oh my gosh, what is happening here, right? And you're like, oh, this seems tough, right? Ask me about it, right? That's what I'm here for. I'm here to help you out. So if any of this seems like a little bit, hand wavy, like, sure, yeah, all right, I guess, make sure to ask about it, right? That's okay. And then last but not least, we got to figure out what line goes through plane P, right? So plane P is the green one that everything's kind of resting on. But the line that's going through it is this one right here, right? We can tell because it's got that little dashed line business that we were working with on the diagram we drew ourselves, right? So we know that it's traveling through this plane at that point E. If we're trying to name it, we just name it FE, right? Or we could say EF would also work. right? And that's it, right? There was a little activity. You'll notice that I kind of scribbled that out. Something we might have done if we were in class together, but it's a little difficult when we're doing this. But that's all right. Right? So what we're going to do is we're going to practice with this together. We'll talk through things as a class when I see you next time. And that's it for this lesson right now. Peace out.